Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin. Others are going to be drifting in various ways, but most of those who are scheduled to speak are here. You'll notice that we are video taping this and doing so in a very professional manner because while we intended this to be a small event and a real conversation, we think that much of what is said will be useful for other kinds of things. And of course, any of you who wanted the copy of the DVD would be happy to give to, in order to engage with the discussion which we are going to be having today. Because we're doing that, when we have conversation, comments, and so forth from the tables, we'll be asking you to use a microphone because the microphones here obviously won't pick that up. So you may think that in a room this small you don't need to use a microphone, but in fact we ask you to do it so that we'll be sure that it's all on the audio aspect of the recording. I'd like to ask you to join me in just a moment of silence for those who were killed yesterday at Virginia Tech. Thank you. There will be actually an event at noon right across the street at Marsh Plaza for the BU community. Obviously, any of us would be able to go over there, although we will be having our lunch. We've also arranged a room for the noon prayers right down the hall here. I'm Charles Glenn, the Dean of the Education School. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce Bilal Kalim, who will be bringing greetings from the Islamic Student Association here at Boston University, which is co-hosting this event with us. But let me just give you a little background on why we're having the event. It actually, arguably, the inception of the idea was in Hungary a few months ago when my friend Ben Vermeulen, a distinguished Dutch legal scholar, and I were speaking about educational freedom to a Hungarian and Eastern European audience. And he happened to illustrate it by discussing the situation of Islamic schools in the Netherlands, which he and Annabeth Dijkstra will talk about at more length later. Something clicked with me about that because, like Ben, I have long been interested in the question of the policies within which educational freedom, which is a basic human right, the policies within which that right is exercised in many different countries. To what extent different countries allow the freedom to create schools, the freedom to have those schools be distinctive, and the freedom for parents to choose those schools. And related to that is the justice issue of whether poor parents are able to have access to such schools. And that's why we look at whether different countries provide financial support for the schools that parents choose, as is the case in most Western democracies, but not generally in the United States. So I've been interested in the policy aspects of that. I worked in government many years here in Massachusetts around those questions. But the other side of the question is, what are people doing with that freedom? What use is being made of it? And there the question might be, or the answer might be, that in some schools, the freedom really isn't being used. That the schools that are created perhaps with a religious character or a specific pedagogical character outside the state system, in fact, look exactly like the schools within the state system. They don't, in fact, function in any way that's significantly different, and so arguably there's no real reason for the exercise of the freedom, and there's no real way for parents to choose because there's nothing to choose. Everything just becomes the same. And that's one of the possible outcomes, and that is an issue. one of my books, The Ambiguous Embrace, looks at the way that often occurs. The other issue, though, and this is one that policymakers often worry about, is whether schools might be created that would in fact be harmful to children. During the campaign for vouchers in California, the California Teachers Association spent millions of dollars running television advertisements that suggested that if we had vouchers, there would be witchcraft schools, and there would be Nazi schools, and there would be all kinds of harmful schools. Now, as an historian, I'm very much aware that in the 19th century, that concern was expressed very strongly about Catholic schools. In fact, my first book, The Myth of the Common School, is about the way in which almost a panic swept many of the American elite at the idea that Catholic immigrants would start their own schools, and the children who attended Catholic schools would never become real Americans. And of course, we know that history has completely falsified that prediction. But it continues to be the primary argument that's raised in policy debates to oppose policies that would make it easier and more affordable for parents to make decisions about their own children. So the conference today is intended to look at what happens in a context in which individuals and groups begin schools that are intended to be religiously distinctive, whether those schools in fact are distinctive and in what sense. And so we'll be hearing from first a group of school administrators, then from a group of parents who will be discussing why they made the sacrifices and the effort to have their child in a school that was distinctive, then from a group of graduates of such schools who will be talking about how the experience affected them. And then we'll have a final panel which will look at some of the policy implications of those issues. So why don't I ask you now, Bilal, to come and bring greetings, and then the first panel will be able to come up, and Kara will be moderating it.
Assalamu alaikum, or peace be upon you, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Professor Glenn and also everyone who's been involved in putting the conference together. But the big thing that I want to do is welcome everyone here, especially on behalf of the Islamic Society of Boston University, of which I am a member, and also on behalf of the BU School of Education, to this conference. And I was thinking before coming into this conference about how, as this American experiment in pluralism extends now into its about 231st year, the discussion in each generation renews itself about what's the best way to balance the need that we have to have a common set of shared experiences and values that will draw us together as American citizens, and at the same time balancing that, on the other hand, with the quintessentially American ethic of preserving the rich diversity of our citizens and communities. Now, the interesting thing is that this tension plays itself out in many arenas, and schools and education are no exception. And in many ways, schools and education are much more a focus of this tension because of the fact that schools and education are seen as the place where the future citizenship is shaped. And as a committed Muslim, this question, this balance between the two things that I mentioned is of a special interest to me, because especially these days, that question of identity, of citizenship, of loyalties closely follows Muslims, whatever field they're involved in. Now, it so happens that I'm also involved. I'm the director of a large grassroots community organization called the Muslim American Society, which holds as its mission to develop and empower the Muslim community to be active citizens who will be motivated by their Islamic values to play a significant role in society as citizens. Now, the reason I mention that is because in this conference on school and education, especially as it comes to shaping the future citizenship, is because one of the three main priority areas that we work in is Muslim youth, and we find that this question comes up as a central part of the work that we do. That is, we find that the tensions on Muslim youth are especially playing out in this way, where there's sort of two tensions, where on the one hand they are, feel the natural and very strong pressure from their peers, from their from other fellow youth growing up towards what's considered normal adolescent behavior, whether it's some of the social pressures towards dating, and sometimes some of the negative things, whether it's towards drinking or feeling this feeling of rebellion towards figures of authority and so on, which is a very normal part of teen behavior. And then on the other hand, there are the pressures from their communities and parents towards many traditional values, which actually many faith-based traditions actually hold and share. And then that's all kind of framed in a context where the youth are very hyper sort of aware of the negative sentiments that are often that are very pervasive due to the circumstances, the political circumstances, due to what's being seen in the media, and it affects Muslim youth very much. That context, if you can imagine, in this stage of identity formation, where they're feeling pressures this way and that way, and the background context that youth are in many ways less savvy in navigating, that they can't trust that their fellow youth would be able to distinguish between, media versus what really a Muslim might be, those sort of things. So in that context, what we have found in the work that we do in our organization is that Muslim youth often take one of two directions, where Muslim youth will either feel that what they must do is sort of isolate themselves or stay within a circle of friends and a community that is in some ways very much exclusively Muslim, and that can lead to certain negative consequences which any type of sort of isolation will lead to. And then on the other hand, we find that many Muslim youth feel, okay, the only solution is to go the complete other direction and fully sort of divorce yourself from any kind of Muslim identity and be part of what they consider is a full way of being part of the American landscape. Now, the interesting thing is that our youth work at the program that I've been talking about has the express purpose of sort of guiding Muslim youth through this identity navigation or identity formation, where the end result is where we hope that we have healthy, committed, and capable Muslim American youth who engage society as productive citizens. And one of my interests today is to actually see how Islamic schools or faith-based schools fit into this picture of identity formation. And I also want to see if there are analogous issues that other faith-based schools deal with. And in the end, we hope that we'll discuss some of the issues of what exactly do faith-based schools seek to accomplish, because in some faith communities, the sort of pressures that I mentioned aren't maybe the most, sort of prominent issue. And as Professor Glenn was mentioning in a conversation, that the question almost is it seems that in certain faith-based schools, is there really a strong guiding purpose towards it being faith-based versus not being faith-based? So we hope some of those questions will come up. And one of the things I want to echo, because I think Professor Glenn mentioned it earlier, it's a great idea, is that I hope that we can mix up some of the diversity at the tables if we find that there's lots represented from one group versus another, so we can benefit the most from the diversity that we have in the audience here. And the last thing, given that I am representing the Islamic Students Association here at BU, I thought I'd start us off with a verse from the Quran that I felt is a good motivator of some of what we hope to accomplish today. And I'm actually going to just say it in Arabic, and then I'll say the verse, and I hope we can accomplish some of that today. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. And basically it means, O mankind, we have created you from a single male and a single female, and we have made you into diverse nations and tribes so that you may come to know and learn from each other. And indeed, the most honored amongst you in the sight of God is the one who is the most conscious of God and the most pious. And indeed, God is the one that's all-knowing, all-aware. And so I thought that concept of learning and benefiting from each other today is going to be sort of the key theme that I hope we do. So thank you once again and welcome.
So Kara Stillings is who is a doctoral student with us at the School of Education, will be moderating this first panel. And if you're on the panel, you know it. Your name's on the program, so come on up. I suspect, you may want to speak at the lectern and then respond to questions at your seats. But as you wish.
Good morning. As Dr. Glenn mentioned, my name is Kara Stillings. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Boston University School of Education.
Is it Rabbi Lehman here?
I don't believe he's arrived yet. So I think I will just take a moment to introduce to you, we have Mr. William Burke of the St. Sebastian School, Timothy Weens of Boston Trinity Academy, and Muna Abuzena, who is currently at Tufts University but has much experience in school administration. I think at this point in time, I'll let each panelist perhaps come up and introduce themselves, maybe say a few words about the school or institution that they represent, and then I'll pose the question and we can go from there. Does that sound okay, Mr. Burke? Would you like to?
Foiled again. I thought by taking that seat I'd be last, but you fooled me. Thank you very much, Charles, for having us here, and I'd like to thank the Islamic Society as well. I think this is just a terrific idea, and I feel honored to be here. One of my favorite writers is a guy named Wendell Berry, who has said that the significance and ultimately the quality of the work we do is determined by our understanding of the story in which we're taking part. And another hero of mine is Teilhard de Chardin, who said that we are not human beings who have spiritual experiences, but we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So that just gives you a sense of the story, I think, of which I feel I'm taking part. And then I'd like to share with you my own writing, very brief passage, and that is that I think one of the great problems of our time is that people tend to expend more energy in making sure they don't offend than they expend in fully being. And who I am is a Roman Catholic. Who I am as a person who follows Jesus is, I believe, someone who ought to shout that stuff from the rooftops. And I like to quote our former Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, who said, there is only one community, and it consists of all people. And we are spiritual beings, and I think it's wonderful that we represent faith-based schools that are committed to nurturing the spiritual even as we seek to intensify scholarship. And it is through the interplay of faith and reason that one can really be a fully integrated human being. So I would just like to share the mission statement of our school. There's a long version and a short version. Say a couple of other things about the school and then take my seat. A Catholic independent school, St. Sebastian seeks to engage young men in the pursuit of truth through faith and reason. By embracing gospel values in an inclusive, nurturing community, and by inspiring intellectual excellence in a structured liberal arts curriculum St. Sebastian strives to empower students for success in college and in life. The ideal St. Sebastian's graduate will be a moral and just person, a gentleman of courage, honor, and wisdom, a lifelong learner who continues to grow in his capacity to know, to love, to serve God and neighbor. 3 long sentences. The short version is pretty easy. Love God, work hard, and take good care of one another. And any one of our students can quote that. We have 350 boys in grades 7 through 12. It's a day school. We're blessed to have Patty Keefe with us, and she'll be on the next panel. Patty and her husband John have been blessed with 11 children, and the deal is we get the boys. And we've had 5 of them, and they're wonderful young men. My wife and I have been blessed with 4 sons. All 4 have been graduated from St. Sebastian's School. So I speak as a father as well as someone who has some other functions in the school. Just a couple stories, and then I'll take my seat. People ask often, is anyone ever offended? You're such a mission-driven school, or are people ever offended? And I say, well, we try to be up front. At the admissions open house, I always look out at the people, and there are usually about 450 people gathered in admission open house in the fall to learn more about our school. And I look out at this sea of faces, and I tell the people a couple of things. I say, you're here to learn more about our school, and our job is to reveal what we think is, what we hold sacred, what we hold important. And so here is the nature of the experience at St. Sebastian's School. If you young men come to us, if you parents send your sons to this school, I can promise you that these young men will be known and loved. They will be inspired by really good teachers to become all that God wants them to be in body, mind, and spirit. They will be prepared for entrance to and success in the most excellent, most appropriate colleges for them. Our expectation is that they will go through these colleges committed to continuing to grow and learn, that they will find themselves engaged in jobs that make this world a better place, and that they'll go to heaven. And everything we do at this school is done with that sense of ultimate purpose ever before us. When our 63 young men graduated last year, I looked at them as they sat in the front row to give my final goodbye to them. And it's really emotional when you're with these young men for 4 to 6 years. And you're saying goodbye, and you're sending them off into the world. And they're going to schools that aren't so mission-driven, most of them. And you want to leave them with something. And you want to make sure that they know you'll be there with them forever. And what I found myself saying to the young men last year is this. I looked at them and I said, I cannot promise you lives free from injury or illness, but I can promise you good lives if you hold sacred your relationships with God and with everyone else. Because if you regard every woman and every man you meet to be someone like you who's made for eternity, then you will treat one another with honor and dignity and respect and truth and love, and you will have good lives. I couldn't work at a school that wasn't faith-based. I'm so proud that we have had many non-Catholic students, many Christians who aren't Catholic, Jewish students, Muslim students. In 1993, and you can look this up, we had two students speak. Rabi Shinshiri, a Muslim student, because he was a valedictorian, went on to Harvard, and Caleb Scott, a Mennonite. He was a salutatorian and went on to Dartmouth. And they spoke about the faith of our school. And Robbie talked about the message of Jesus, including him. The message of Jesus is one of inclusion, not exclusion. And again, people ask me, well, what if somebody's offended? And I say, well, if anyone's offended by the manner in which we're living out our faith, one of 2 things is true. Either we're doing something wrong, or we're being misperceived. In either case, what is needed is intellectual inquiry, good, honest, heart-to-heart dialogue. And we'll have lots of it. And this is the last story, I promise. In 1993, was my 4th year, this is my 17th year as headmaster. the assistant headmaster told me that I had a big problem on my hand. And I said, what's the problem? He said, well, so-and-so, who's the parent of a new student, is really upset. He said he was sold a bad bill of goods and that he didn't know we were such a Catholic school, and that if we can't exempt his son from chapel and from the religion requirement, he's going to pull his son out of school. And so I said, okay, well, I'll take it from here. So I called the father, and he issued these same charges. And he said, so are you going to exempt my son from these requirements? And I said, well, no, I'm not. And I remember this line, it stayed with me. He says, I push and still you resist. And I said, and he said, why? And I said, because I haven't talked to your son yet. I don't know what the problem is. My son will be in your office at 3 p.m. today. So the young man came in. And we sat, and he looked at his shoes. And really, the Holy Spirit provided this inspiration. I don't know what possessed me to ask the question, but early on I said, where do you want to go to college? And he looked up at me and he smiled and said, BC. So I said, well, you know, it's a Catholic college, Boston College. So I said, what's really the issue here? He said, oh, Mr. Burke, I didn't want to come to this school. I wanted to go to a co-ed school, and you know, I wasn't. I'd always been in private schools, so I knew I was going to go to a private school, and I'm here, and I just wasn't that happy here. So I knew my father would overreact, and I had to think of something to blame it on. So I said, it's just so Catholic. And he took the bait and overreacted. But these last couple of days, I haven't come to school, but I've gone to the public school in my town, and I've never been to a public school before, and I'm just lost now. And I said, well, listen, I'll tell you what we'll do. Why don't you stay with us and work really, really hard? And one of two things will happen if you work really hard. Either you'll fall in love with this school and want to stay here and graduate from here, or you'll build up a record that'll enable me to get you into any school you want to go to. But let's be together here and let's work hard at it. Well, of course, he stayed and he graduated, and his parents got very active in the school. And I can tell you, in 17 years, that's the only time that this has been an issue. And I realize it's self-selected. We're very upfront about who we are and what our school stands for, and some families shy away from that. But we feel it's our job to be honest and true about who we are. We're neither apologetic nor arrogant about who we are as a Catholic school, and we're wonderfully enriched by the students and faculty who come to us from other faith traditions. We learn an awful lot from them. And Mark 9:40, whoever's not against us is for us. If somebody wants to come in there and tear down the faith of our school, well, we don't want that person in the school. But if someone has no faith at all, or comes from a different faith tradition and is open to it, then that person's going to help us. We really believe that. So thank you very much.
Rabbi Lehman? Yes, why don't you join us too? Another bow tie.
Good morning. My name is Tim Weens. I am the headmaster at Boston Trinity Academy. And to just tell you briefly a little bit about our school, Boston Trinity Academy is an evangelical Christian school in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Boston. We are a young school. We're only 5 years old. We started in 2002 with 52 students and have grown over the past 4 years into this year. Now we have 165 students in grades 6 through 12. We are the only evangelical Christian high school within the city limits of Boston, and one of only a few in the greater Boston area. We are proud and happy to be a part of the Boston community and the greater Boston faith-based schooling community, and it's an honor for me to be a part of this conversation today. So I want to thank Dr. Glenn and the School of Education as well as the Islamic Society for having me here today and for allowing me to be a part of this. A little bit about Boston Trinity Academy. As I said, we started 5 years ago. Last year, we had our first graduating class, which for us was an incredible experience. Our students come to us from many different places throughout Boston and the greater Boston area. We have students from 30 towns outside of Boston, as well as just about every one of the 24 neighborhoods of Boston represented within our school. We're a school of diversity, and we hear that a lot in education. But we believe at Boston Trinity Academy that we're one of the most diverse schools in the greater Boston area, or actually just about anywhere. Our students come from basically every socioeconomic background that you can imagine. We have students whose parents, we have students who may not have any parents, who are living with relatives that sacrifice to put them in our school, from very poor backgrounds. We have students from middle class backgrounds, and we have students whose parents are upper middle class and even wealthy students. And for us, this diversity is a part of the fabric and the foundation of what we do. Our school, Mr. Burke talked a little bit about the mission of their school, and I'm not going to tell you our entire mission statement, but our school is founded on 3 primary principles. First and foremost, we're a Christian school, so everything that we do is based on the Christian principle that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that underscores what we teach within our classrooms. The second principle that is foundational for us is the fact that we are a school of academic rigor. Our school is a college preparatory school, and the goal is to get all of our students into a 4-year college or university, the best 4-year college or university that fits their needs. And for us, that's part of the big challenge, in that many of our students are going to be first-generation college students, but also many of our students are even going to be first-generation high school graduates. And so to take them from where they were and to fill the gaps and to give them a strong foundation academically is essential in preparing them for their future lives as servant leaders. We talk a lot about servant leadership and helping our students go out into the world, preparing them to be leaders who are not in it for themselves, but to make a difference in the lives of other people. So that's the second founding principle. The third founding principle is that we are a school of diversity that meets the needs of students from all over the greater Boston area. And in fact, we've grown in that respect to even include students from outside of the greater Boston area, in that we now have an international student population where we have 17 students from around the country at our school this year as well. Places like Cameroon, Korea. We have a student from Nigeria coming next year, and we believe that part of the mission of our school is to educate them as well, and to represent what the city of Boston is all about. And as you look at Boston University and other universities in this area, it's very diverse in the sense that they also have a strong international student population. So our goal is to educate those students who want to be a part of our school. And again, like Bill stated just a moment ago, our school is not necessarily for everybody. And students have to understand that when they come to our school, that they come to a school that is Christian in character, as well as in the implementation and the outcomes of our student goals, and that they are going to be a part of a Christian school. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more later. So that's important. However, our students come from faith backgrounds as well. We have Buddhist students, Muslim students, agnostic students, atheist students, students who come from no faith backgrounds at all, and then students who represent many different Christian faith traditions. That's a little bit about Boston Trinity Academy. Again, thank you very much for having me today. It's my pleasure, my honor, and somewhat humbling as well. So thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Good morning. I'm Mona Abuzina, and I'm substituting for Sausan Berjawi, who unfortunately wasn't able to be here today. Sausan is the principal of 2 schools, the Islamic Academy of New England and Al Noor Academy, both of them in the southern area, in Sharon and in Mansfield. I'm here sort of because I do have experience being an administrator at the Islamic Academy of New England, and because I do a fair amount of consultation to the Islamic schools. I want to thank the Boston University School of Education, and particularly under Dr. Glenn's leadership, for really bringing religion and faith-based schools, or schools that take faith seriously, into a very important conversation about how do we, as a pluralistic society in America, handle these issues. And I think oftentimes in the separation of church and state, or religion and state, very important aspects of our humanity get dropped out. So thank you for this leadership initiative. Just to give you a quick overview of Islamic schools in Massachusetts, we have currently 9 full-time schools that span a geographic distance or area, basically forming a triangle, with Methuen being in the north, with the Sharon-Mansfield area being in the south, and Worcester being in the west. There are also a number of weekend schools and after-school programs, and as Bilal was mentioning earlier, as parents are trying to navigate and help their children navigate this idea of developing an Islamic identity and also building their, their scholarly record, parents are trying to figure out what works best. And what I often counsel parents to think about is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Parents really need to know what their child's skills and needs are, and they need to know what the schools offer so that they can go into any sort of agreement or arrangement fully cognizant of what they'll be getting and realizing they won't be getting everything, and that there needs to be a lot of reinforcement and a lot of overlap at home. In addition to these full-time schools, there are a few things that are sort of emerging. One is the Muslim American Society Council of Islamic Schools. This is under MAS, the organization that Bilal mentioned earlier, the grassroots organization. They have a national chapter, but we also are establishing a Massachusetts chapter as well because, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more in the policy area, we're definitely recognizing as we have more and more schools that have very similar but sometimes different missions, but united under this idea of trying to develop students who are very committed Muslims, but as well prepared for integrating themselves in all the positive ways that they can be integrated into American society, that we, as the schools are developing into, past the 5th year, some of them as many as maybe 15 years of operation now, need to make sure that we are meeting all of the types of accountability so that our schools are worthy of our children and worthy of being the work, being served as work that is dedicated to God. As we're looking at some of the common themes, and I expect that a lot of the faith schools that are taking faith seriously have a lot of common themes in terms of encouraging hard work, encouraging respect for others. I think that there are many values that we will see in common. I do want to also highlight a few differences that we might be wanting to look at, particularly about the Islamic schools. And one of the differences that I wanted to point out is that for many of the Islamic schools, a big percentage of the student population are youth who are immigrant youth, or their parents are immigrants. So in addition to them trying to understand and reconcile the role of faith in an increasingly secular mainstream context, they're also dealing with sometimes home languages that are different and trying to navigate sort of expectations that their parents may have. This is certainly not to say that that almost everybody is immigrant, because certainly you'll see from our parent representative today that we have lots of indigenous or second-generation Muslims, but I think this is a factor that is important to look at. And the last comment that I wanted to mention is that because the families are committing to these schools, sometimes one of the factors that, as I looked at, for example, the role of parent involvement in some of the schools, is that many of them were making incredible sacrifices, and we'll be looking at this at the parent panel, but issues when we're thinking about this, looking at how does this affect the day-to-day life, whether it's working an extra job so that you can pay the tuition, or driving an extra 20 miles or something in Boston traffic or around Boston, just to make this faith-based school choice a reality for your family. So thank you all for taking time from your busy weeks, and I look forward to a very positive conversation.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Lehman. Sorry for being late. I'm the headmaster of Gann Academy, the new Jewish high school of Greater Boston, which is located in Waltham, Massachusetts. This is our 10th year as a school. It's my final year as the founding headmaster. I'm retiring in a few months. We have 310 students in 9th through 12th grade. And this was the first and thus far the only Jewish high school in the Greater Boston area, in fact in all of New England, that has an ideology of pluralism at its core. The pluralism that we focus on is a pluralism within the Jewish community. There are various Jewish denominations in the United States: Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Jewish Renewal. There are secular Jews. And this school was founded in order to bring together Jews from across the spectrum of the community, to study together, to live in an intensive Jewish community together, and to have the benefits of a very high-quality private school education. Up until the founding of our school, there were a number of Jewish day schools in the Boston area. Currently, there are approximately 14. Most of those were K through 8 schools. And there really was only one significant high school, which was the Maimonides School, still exists as a K through 12 school today, very vibrant school. And that school is under Orthodox Jewish auspices, the most traditional within the Jewish community. And there was a tremendous growth in Jewish day schools over the last 20 years or so. For most of the history of American Jewry, American Jews made a very strong commitment to the public school system. And faith-based schools within the Jewish community, Jewish parochial schools, were really, for much of the 20th century, only the commitment of the Orthodox Jewish community, the most traditional within the Jewish community. Starting in the 60s and 70s, that began to change. I think largely due to concerns about the public school system and all kinds of issues around race and urban centers and that kind of thing. Jewish schools began to develop across the denominational spectrum, but not including high schools. It's only really since the 1990s that there's been any significant growth of Jewish high schools beyond the Orthodox community. There were a handful before the 1990s, and in the 1990s you see a blossoming of Jewish high schools across the country, so that now there are probably 35 or so non-Orthodox Jewish high schools. Our school here in Boston is very interested in developing young Jews who understand what it means to have serious conversations with people whose religious perspective is different from theirs. We have a lot of programming, a lot of academic work on how does one have a conversation over serious issues, controversial issues, issues that are of great import, with people who have very different perspectives. Now, we're doing that largely, although not exclusively, within the Jewish community, and there's a lot of work to be done just within. But the educational notion is that if you can produce people who understand what it means to engage in that kind of pluralistic conversation, and if they can do it within their own faith community, they have a much greater likelihood that they're going to be able to extend that beyond. I'm a product of public school my entire life. I went to a suburban public school, which wasn't all that diverse, although obviously had people from various different religious backgrounds. But religion was really never a topic for conversation formally within the school. And so there's this whole realm of life, and in America, as we know, this is a rather religious country, according to all the polls. There wasn't really an opportunity in my public school background to really explore that. The notion at our school is that if you can develop students' particular commitments, if they know who they are as young Jews, and they feel they have something to contribute to the world, specifically as Jews, then they're going to go on to colleges, to the workplace, to their communities and the larger society, and they're going to have something to contribute that's unique. They're going to have a perspective that's particular to add to this pluralistic society. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to infuse their learning with Jewish values, with Jewish perspectives, which are different often than Christian, Muslim, Buddhist values. And we want them to be able to take those values, think about them, evaluate them, to the extent that they wish, integrate them into their lives, and then share them in the broader context of this society. And that's our goal. In order to accomplish this goal, we have a problem. We have an obstacle. And the obstacle is that all of the students in our school are Jewish. It's an intensive Jewish community where there's daily prayer. We have different kinds of prayer because we have different Jewish commitments. But there's daily prayer. There's Sabbath retreat experiences. There's Jewish studies that are much more extensive than many other religious-based schools. They take 3 courses every year that are just in a religious text study. So our problem is, how do we expose kids beyond the Jewish community that's in the school? And so we have various kinds of programs, social justice programs. I just went with a group of students to El Salvador. We've volunteered in a rural village in El Salvador as a part of a program sponsored by the American Jewish World Service. We have all kinds of programs which involve students in the Boston area in various projects. We had for many years an exchange program with a Catholic school in Cambridge, North Cambridge Catholic School. But it's a real issue, a challenge. How do we get out of both of our suburban location and the uniformity, at least within the Jewish community, of their experience on a day-to-day basis, and provide them with the opportunities to really explore beyond the confines of the Jewish community. We constantly work on this issue, and we're pleased that many of our graduates who go on to colleges, universities, and other kinds of settings have chosen to be involved in various kinds of programs, organizations, institutions, which allow them to integrate, to engage others beyond the Jewish community, and to make a difference because they're bringing something unique from their Jewish education that they received at our school. So I'm very pleased to be here. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be a part of this important dialogue, and I look forward to the exchange that will take place over the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think that Rabbi Lehman's comments are a great segue into considering the more specific question that we have on the table for this panel. And what I'd like to do is remind us all of what that question is, and then we'll let the panelists discuss. And around 10:45, we'll open it up for questions and discussions. So I hope you'll be taking close notes. The specific question on the table is, we'd like each panelist to address how your school seeks to deepen students' understanding of their tradition while preparing them for a pluralistic society. So I don't know if we have anybody who'd really like to begin.
I'll start. I mean, it's my belief that, pardon?
Be sure you're using
Okay, I'll speak into the mic. It's my belief that gospel values are human values, and that most of us from our various religious traditions have more in common than we do apart. And the golden rule of, do unto others which you would have them do unto you, from my understanding of the other religious traditions represented here, runs right throughout all of them. So I would take it almost from a different angle of, it's been said this morning that perhaps we've fallen away from a huge part of who we are as spiritual beings, and that there's some things that can only be known by faith or by the interplay of faith and reason. So I feel as though it's an opportunity for us to kick the bushel basket off the lantern and let it shine.
Anybody else like to weigh in?
Excuse me. Islam, we believe, is a comprehensive way of life. And so what that means in terms of being comprehensive is that there is wisdom and there are specific directives within the Quran, within the Sunnah, the traditions of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, and all of the other prophets, that give us very clear ideas about how to treat one another, about how to work, how to play, everything. And so one of the preparations is this idea of working hard and preparing to excel. This is not just an academic issue, but by doing this, you are worshiping, and so we have very strong curriculum that often follows the Department of Education standards for the sort of regular academic subjects, and then we have curriculum for the Islamic subjects, and we don't sort of have these in very separate compartments, but because Islam is comprehensive, we try to incorporate these ideas and values through all of the sort of daily lessons and so forth, making making sort of anything relevant that it seems relevant at that particular time. And this is a challenge, I think, because especially I think I was really resonating with your idea. Islamic schools right now, we have the preponderance of them being elementary, middle school, and only one Islamic high school in the area. And the reason for that, and if you look at want ads in education, it's much harder to attract qualified science, math, foreign language, special needs teachers who have, say a master's in those areas to teach at a secondary school level. And one of the ways we have tried to address that at Al-Noor Academy is through something called a dual enrollment program, where youth who are juniors and performing at a certain level are able to take classes at a college, right now at Bridgewater State College. And so they're able to, after they've gotten a solid grounding in terms of the Islamic education, they continue to do some of their coursework, the Islamic coursework at Al-Noor, but they also have an opportunity to get the high standards of, the science, math, and the rest of their education off campus, and start dealing with, in a sort of gradual way, instead of it all being at once at college, start dealing with living and interacting in a pluralistic society. Another thing I'd like to mention is for youth who are younger than that, through the middle schools and high schools, many of them have really positive relations with whatever the hosting school system is, and long-standing exchange programs where, particularly, I was certified in social studies when I worked in public schools, and I know that many social studies teachers, because of the standards that are about teaching about Islam, get really stuck when they get to these units, because most of the textbooks that are adopted by public schools don't afford a lot of resources and materials to be able to teach that. Current events makes it especially challenging to be able to understand how to explain, Islam and Muslims given post 9/11 and all of these events. And so teachers are oftentimes looking for ways to sort of make it real and to bring down the tension. And Islamic schools have taken on an increasing role in helping bridge these. And this opportunity of having, schools like Buckingham Brown and Nichols or Milton Academy come visit for half a day and have the youth themselves present, well, what is Islam? What do we do as Muslims? Have them, have a display of different artifacts, Qur'ans translated into different languages. Talk about, do you really pray 5 times? Well, yes, we do pray 5 times a day. And, well, no, don't worry, it doesn't take that long. And sort of... sort of make it very personal so that the youth themselves, in terms of developing their Islamic identity, have an opportunity to assert themselves and identify proactively instead of responding to a lot of the negative images that they're unfortunately bombarded with. We look at these as starting points, but certainly this is a challenge, and it really depends on the child in terms of, a very sort of shy child or something who tends to be tends not to integrate very much or tends not to be very social. Sometimes it can be a bit of a shock when all of a sudden later on they're in a setting where they don't have as much social support.
I'll echo some of the things that Mona just said. At Boston Trinity Academy, one of the things we talk a lot about with our faculty is the fact that they are the quote, living curriculum. They are the people who are the models of what we want to send our students out to be and to look like. And so when you talked about worship and excellence as a form of worship, we wholeheartedly agree with that principle. For us, the Bible specifically tells us that we're supposed to love the Lord our God with our hearts, our souls, and our minds. And so we want to establish within our students an understanding that pushing yourself academically and the rigor of academics is something in which our students can use to worship the Lord. We're also called to specifically do things as if we did it unto the Lord. And so our students, hopefully in response to what they're seeing from their teachers and others in our community, are echoing and are living out that excellence. So for us, academic excellence is a huge part of what we're trying to instill within our kids. And then it goes further than just academic excellence as well, and I know it does within the other schools that are being represented today, but we spend a lot of time in prayer and in worship. We have weekly chapel services. Our students pray daily with their teachers. We have advisory groups where all of our students, all of our faculty, staff, and administration have an advisory group of anywhere from 5 to 8 students that we spend extended time with each week, both in small groups and one-on-one. And during that time, it's not all about necessarily Christianity and worship. We follow them, we track their grades, we deal with them if there's disciplinary issues. But a part of it as well is the faith component and instilling within our students an understanding of who they are as Christians, or if they're not Christians, what Christianity is all about, and helping them build a foundation of understanding. And one of the things that we know, because our students come to us from different faith traditions, is that they may not all leave our school as believing Christians the way in which we believe. But we do believe that they will leave with an understanding of what it means to be a Christian and to live a Christian life, and those ideals will be something that stick with them, and at some point in their life, maybe they will become Christians. Maybe they won't. We believe that's not our decision to make. That's something that the Holy Spirit and that God does through their lives.
I want to make the claim that the best preparation for pluralism is particularism. You can't really have a pluralistic society if everybody's homogeneous. You really can't have a very pluralistic society if it's a melting pot, which, as you know, certainly through the 1950s, was the dominant metaphor for American society. Pluralism assumes that there's a respectful, critical, but loving interaction between particular groups of people, different ideologies, different ethnicities, different religious traditions. And I think America is beginning to awaken to the fact that the notion somehow that the best preparation for pluralism is to wash out the differences and to create a kind of white bread educational culture is really not in our country's best interest. It's not in our society's best interest. And I think within the Jewish community, there's the beginning of a realization that we've tried so hard to blend in and to be successful Americans that in many respects we've lost so much of the unique values and traditions that are not only important for our own enrichment, but allow us to contribute something significant to society. For example, the students in my school, I hope, would graduate with the sense that when Jews speak about our obligations to others, within the Hebrew language, there really is no equivalent to the word charity. We really don't have a word for charity. What we do have a word for is loving kindness, chesed, and tzedakah, which means justice. And loving kindness and justice are very different words in their connotation, and I think in their implementation, than charity. And what we hope is that students getting this kind of education, and I think it's true of all of the faith traditions, will be able to enter into a conversation in American society about what does it mean to take responsibility for other people's welfare. Is it a matter of charity? Is it a matter of justice? Is it a matter of loving kindness? And we all are going to bring the narratives of our traditions, the legal history of our traditions, the values, and the way our traditions are lived out in communities. We're going to bring that to bear on important questions. Questions about healthcare, questions about war, questions about economic equity. These are going to be issues, and we need to bring the great richness of our tradition to bear on these human questions. It's not just about our own development as human beings, although that's critically important, our own spiritual development. It's also about what our vision for the society is and how these religious traditions can actually enter into the conversation in really positive ways. Again, we're living in a very religious culture. So as opposed to Western Europe, there's an ability to have this conversation and an openness to allow religious values and religious language to enter into the conversation. And I think ultimately the pluralism of the society is going to be highly dependent on schools like this, like these, to produce people who are comfortable having the conversation with people who
who are not like they are, but who want to have the conversation and bring their particular perspective and their particular tradition into the conversation.
I'll just make one more comment. Rabbi Lehman was talking a little bit about the big conversation and having us all dialogue together, which is the point of this entire conference. I just returned a few weeks ago from South Africa, where I was doing some work with a school in South Africa, but as I was hired to help them, I came back probably a more changed person from what they taught me. And one of the most important principles that I learned is a tribal African principle that is known as Ubuntu. And it's the idea, roughly translated, means I am because you are. And for us as Americans, I think this is something that we could learn well from our African brothers and sisters, in that whether we're a melting pot or a tossed salad or anything like that, we are because of who we're next to. And I think this conversation could go much more deeply if we started to grasp that and believe that.
It's interesting. One of my favorite theologians is Henry Nouwen, and I get this daily email, and his reflection just the other day was, sometimes it is only in the eyes of the receivers that givers discover their gifts, which is really the same sentiment I think you expressed.
Would you like to open it up at this point? Yes, Professor Skip.
You were expecting questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. My name's Peter Scarry. I teach political science at Boston College, and I'm delighted to be here and commend Charlie Glenn for convening this. I guess my question is directed primarily to Rabbi Lehman, who it seems to me has done what several of you have tried to do, but I think he did it more directly, which is to highlight the tensions and the tensions in a pluralistic society between defining one's group and nurturing it, and how that places you vis-a-vis the other groups in a pluralist society. So I say that, Rabbi, because I'm going to press you a little bit and raise some questions that I raise not in the spirit of trying to of being provocative or give you a hard time, but to put some flesh on some of these bones. As I'm doing research, for example, on Islamic schools, these questions are all sort of very live ones for me. For example, when you talked about the problem of teaching your students to share what they're learning in your school, I'd like you to elaborate on that a bit. As I take it from Jewish friends and colleagues, Jews are very self-conscious about not proselytizing. So sharing then, I assume, becomes a complicated undertaking, perhaps, or one that requires some self-consciousness for Jews and for your students.
I don't think so.
No? Well, let me ask. Let me pose one more.
If we can't share without proselytizing, then I think the whole conversation in the American polity is really in trouble.
Well, I wasn't suggesting you can't. I was asking how that gets framed if it's perceived as intention with a concern not to proselytize.
Well, I think the issue of Jewish proselytization is, first of all, overblown.
Okay.
For most of our history, the reason why Jews didn't proselytize is because the Christian majority didn't allow us to proselytize. Prior to the advent of Christendom, especially in the ancient world, Jews did proselytize, and at one point, a significant percentage of the Roman Empire was Jewish. Prior to the dawn of Christianity. It is true, however, that in the last 2,000 years, Jews have, I think, integrated a notion that we don't proselytize. But I think that the notion of having conversations about values in which you bring your particular religious perspective to bear, whether it's abortion or whether it's what's happening in Darfur or whatever it is. I think in this country in particular, given the fact that there's a separation of church and state, and given the fact that there's somewhat neutral ground upon which you can have those conversations and even bring in a religious perspective without, I think, fear, largely anyway, that we're seeking to proselytize. And given the fact, I think, that the Jewish tradition has been a non-proselytizing tradition, again, mostly as a result of external forces, but that's been the reality, I think actually we don't even think about it. We don't think of ourselves as proselytizing. I don't think we have any self-consciousness about it. I don't think we have any fear about it. I think the fear, quite frankly, and this is what our school is trying to address, the fear is a deep concern that we actually don't have much to say. I think the fear that American Jews have is that, what do I really bring to the table as an American Jew? And what our school is trying to say is, well, there's actually a lot to bring to the table, and the reason why people are concerned about it is because they haven't explored it fully enough, and they think that this Judeo-Christian thing means that everything that's Christian, is basically Jewish. And then, what do I have to contribute that's unique? And what we're trying to say is no, that the whole Judeo-Christian thing has truth in it, but it's also problematic, and it has been an obstacle to Jews to understand their tradition deeply enough that they actually have something to offer in that conversation.
Question over here?
My question is also for Rabbi Lehman. I wrote down when you were speaking, how are Jewish values different? Because I believe you said that they were different.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting to hear that, and I'd like to know how they are different.
Well,
you gave
I'll give you some examples. I think, listen, it seems to me that any tradition, religious tradition, that's been around for several thousand years, all over the world, that's developed its own internal capacities for religious and spiritual life, is going to be different than another religious tradition that's developed in a different way. I mean, it seems to me that has to be a presumption. But let me give you an example. Take the abortion debate. The Jewish tradition has been discussing abortion for 2,000 years. And it has a variety of perspectives on it. But they're not the same perspectives as the Catholic Church. And they're not the same perspectives as evangelical Christians. And they're not the same perspectives as Islam. It's very complex. There's not one Jewish perspective. There are many Jewish perspectives over the course of those millennia. But they deal with understandings of when does life begin, which are unique within Judaism. They have to do with the value of life that is post-birth and life that is pre-birth. They have to do with the values of mother versus child. There are all kinds of issues, and it's hard to summarize them because, quite frankly, there are conflicting, diverse opinions and perspectives in the Jewish community. But unless you delve into those texts as a Jew on the question of abortion, and there are many, many contemporary legal and religious opinions being written all of the time in the Jewish community in America about abortion, you're not going to understand how Jews have, over the last several thousand years, thought about it. And it's different, I can tell you, because my wife's a medical ethicist, and she deals with a broad group of issues and people and perspectives. And the Jewish perspective, number one, is often not known because we're a small minority in this country, and the material is very complex just in terms of the fact that it's written in different language often. And so in our school, for instance, we have a course in Jewish medical ethics, which takes common issues of medical ethics and says, how have Jews, over the course of the ages, dealt with this issue? Doesn't mean that that's the way a particular student is going to approach the issue, but we want them to understand that Jews have been thinking about this and have been thinking about it within the categories that are unique to the Jewish religious tradition.
Thank you. I think we'll make time for a couple more. Oh,
Could I make just one quick comment? I think sometimes definitions and making certain things clear may be helpful. And so, Dr. Scare, your original question was about proselytizing, and then there was a follow-up question about, what's particularly different. And I just wanted to point out, I think maybe many of us in this room are interested in putting religion as part of a polity, a discussion within American society. There was a very interesting distinction here. When Rabbi Lehman was giving sort of some of the details, somebody might describe that as proselytizing, but really what would be, I think what would be more accurate is to say that you are talking about religion, about particular ideas and beliefs and values within the Jewish tradition, and not teaching religion. And that those are two very separate things. So when we're thinking about how does this take place in different contexts, in public schools and other contexts, I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. And as Tim mentioned a little bit earlier, it could be that a product of such a conversation or learning about something could be that one person eventually at some point may want to embrace some of these ideas. But it's, I think, a mission of all of our schools to at least provide accurate information. When you mentioned in your earlier comments, if there's some sort of an idea that we're being pushy, either we're doing something wrong or they're perceiving us as wrong, and sometimes just providing that accurate information about what a particular religious tradition believes about a set of issues is a very important point, I think.
Very good. Professor Vermeulen.
My name is Ben Vermeulen from the Netherlands. I'm very thankful to be here. I would like to raise a question to all panelists, but I don't know if there's time to get answers from all of them. And it is that, on the one hand, your schools are based on a specific faith and presume the existence of some absolute norms, absolute values, absolute truths. On the other hand, these schools also have to prepare for a very pluralistic, differentiated society. And your pupils have to be educated towards tolerance, towards respect for other traditions. And that raises the question, which has been bothering me for a long time: to what extent should faith-based schools really also allow teaching towards relativism? To what extent do you allow discussions and even real hard thinking about questioning your own absolute values? To what extent do you allow students to develop an attitude saying, I believe in this and that, but maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm partially wrong? So to what extent are you able to combine a belief in absolute eternal truth on the one hand and the necessity to develop a minimum of relativism?
I guess I'll take that's not a softball that you threw out there, but I'll take a whack at it. To me, there's a word I love. C.S. Lewis loved the word as well, and the word is ought, O-U-G-H-T. And I shared a passage from George Weigel a couple of Mondays ago in our, what we call corporate chapel. We begin our week together in church. And the passage was essentially this: for all of us men and women, there is a gap between the person we are today and the person we ought to be. And I hope that that's a concept that all of our students fully embrace. There's a way we ought to be. We ought to be kind. We ought to be loving. We ought to be truthful. We ought to be hardworking. There's nothing very relative about any of those things. There are absolutes, which I think every sentient human being can and should agree upon. Kindness is one of those.
Could I just add, as someone who teaches future teachers, I'm struck with how often they think that a teacher must never impose his or her values. And I try to teach them that there are certain values, or virtues, I prefer to say, which we should seek to develop and we should not be apologetic about. And I think that's the point you're making. I would add the virtue of courage also, for example, as essential to living a life that, in fact, is able to keep its hand on the plow. So I think that's a good word. But perhaps others were going to answer that too.
Well, I would make a distinction between relativism and pluralism. I think pluralism is where you understand the limits of your own truths, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have any, or that all of your truths need to be placed into doubt because other people have other perspectives. But pluralism is the recognition, I think, that your truth and your understanding of that truth is not universal. And that as a thinking human being, one of your obligations is to try to understand how other people come to their truths and how they understand their lives lived by those truths. In my tradition, there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on doubt. When we study in my school, for instance, the narratives about Moses, I don't have to go beyond our tradition in order to get the students to think about all of the failures and failings and doubts that our own biblical heroes and heroines have. And in fact, part of what we try to do is actually take students who have rather absolute notions of the virtues of these figures and try to provide them with a more complex, more nuanced understanding. In fact, I think more religious understanding, because the religious understanding that my tradition teaches is that ultimately, relative to the infinite God, all humans are limited. All humans both possess the potential for greatness, but also the potential for great evil, and certainly the potential for mistakes all the time. And what the religion tries to do is to say, yeah, but you got to get yourself up and try again towards those great virtues. But in many ways, I think religion is actually one of the most powerful ways to teach humility. Remember, in the 20th century, the great evils done to this world were not done by religious traditions for the most part. They were done by the great hubris of secular and often anti-religious traditions. And I think religion has great potential. It's not always actualized, but great potential to instill humility, which I think is critical for pluralism.
Excellent. In the interest of time, did we have a microphone over here?
One of the many issues plaguing the public schools is the issue of bullying and tolerance. And I was just wondering if in your schools you find that you have similar issues, or if your overall approach to tolerance in the faith-based community holds true to other biases like racial biases, ethnic issues, sexual orientation, things like that that are bullying issues in the public schools.
I don't like the word tolerance. I like to replace it with celebration. Tolerance always seems to be something you put up with. And I think that, we like to celebrate that every human being is a genetically unrepeatable gift from God who ought to be honored because he and she is made by the divine creator, just as all of us happen to be. I think Rabbi Lehman is hit the nail right on the head. Mistakes are made. You can have the loftiest mission in the world and the best people advancing it, and that doesn't mean, Mark Twain said, people can be so awful cruel to one another, and they certainly can be. And the success is how you respond to that. What do you do when somebody's being picked on, and how do you address those issues? We were blessed years ago. We had this wonderful speaker at our school, a gentleman by the name of Ron Burton, who had been a great football player for the New England Patriots and a very committed Christian. And he told a story to all of us about growing up in Ohio and being picked on an awful lot as a young man. And he would come home crying to his grandmother. And he said he learned that anyone who picks on another is feeling horrible about himself or herself, or the bullying wouldn't be taking place. And so he encouraged all of our students, when somebody is being a bully, to pray for that person, because that person is suffering mightily. And so I remember I had a seventh grader come to me years ago because he was in tears. He had been picked on by another seventh grader. And I cited Mr. Burton, and I said, you weren't here when Mr. Burton spoke, but he reminded all of us that the bully feels horrible about himself And the kid said, Mr. Burke, I'm the one who's hurting here, not him. I said, no, he's hurting. He wouldn't do that. So we need to pray for him, because if he doesn't change, he can't stay in our school. I have to call his mother and say, you have to come get this young man, because he's not living according to the school's principles. And then he immediately came to the kid's defense. Well, don't throw him out. And we worked through it together. But I think that the faith-based schools, my assumption is, and again, I don't have a great experience with non-private education, non-independent education, but I think we're uniquely qualified to address these issues on a deeply religious level, as well as just a common sense human level.
This living curriculum, like forgiveness and opportunities to actually do it, not just within a religion class.
I mean, I think in my experience in my school, there is bullying. Compared to my public school experience, it's at a completely different level in terms of the frequency and the severity of it. But I'll give you an example, which was very disturbing. We had a student, it's subtle. We had a student who went on Facebook or some equivalent to that, and because there was a debate in our school about affirmative action, whether women should be guaranteed a place on our student disciplinary committee, because even though they had run for the office, they hadn't been elected in the last couple of years, and there was a lot of concern about why women weren't represented on this. And there's a whole debate. A kid put on Facebook a list of the 10 smartest students in his class, a senior class, from his perspective. He listed their names. And at the end of it, he said, and you see, there are only 2 girls out of the 10. Now, this took place outside of school, had nothing to do with, it wasn't on our email system or anything, but we got wind of it the next day, and this student was disciplined. Why? Because we considered that bullying, we considered it abusive, and even though it took place outside of the framework of school, we said to him, one of the core values of our school is how we speak to each other and about each other, especially in public fora. And this is really undermining the dignity of these people, the people both you listed and the people you didn't list in your entire class. And bullying takes place, but I think the ability to address it within a context of serious values, which can be reinforced and hopefully are reinforced on a regular basis by the faculty and by their peers, I think allows us to make a real difference in the kids' lives as to how they see their words and actions and the impact that they have on others. And this kid, was very, very scared that this would have an impact on his college admissions. And in fact, we said, you're going to have to indicate that you were disciplined because we, suspended him or whatever it was. And it was serious business.
We held a conference just 2 weeks ago on cyber ethics, deals with these issues, and brought out a special issue of the Journal of Education on cyber ethics. If anyone is particularly interested in this, give us your name and we'll get you a copy.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more point, and I believe that this issue and the idea of discipline and bullying and whatever else you might want to consider, it comes back to the question on truth. And as a Christian school and as schools that are faith-based, we all have our beliefs that we see as truth. But from our perspective as a Christian school, we can attack these issues from the perspective of being Christians, and our Christian truths teach that you can't or you shouldn't be doing this. And as a result, not only is it hitting a problem, but it's really reinforcing everything that, the foundation of which we're all about. So from my perspective, it gets back to this idea on pluralism, or not even pluralism, but relativism and truth, in that this is truth. And our truth is that this isn't what Jesus would call us to live like, and he's given us very specific guidelines. And whether it's Christianity or whatever other religion, we all have our truths that can be used to attack such issues.
Can I add a little bit of humor to this, which really evinces the cowardice of bullying? A woman by the name of Molly Ivins has written, and I read, "War brings out the patriotic bullies In World War I, they went around kicking dachshunds on the grounds that dachshunds were German dogs. They did not, however, go around kicking German shepherds.
We're determined to remain on schedule in fairness to the other panels. One of the reasons we've organized around tables is in hopes that the conversation will continue. We have an hour-long break for lunch, which we hope will be a chance for discussion. So this really, we build this as a conversation. We really intend it to be that. But I think at this point we need to thank this panel so we can go on to the next one.